The finest books deserve the finest bindings. And no books are more precious than the 4 first editions of Shakespeare, perhaps the most valuable books in the world. Master bookbinder Peter Goodwin worked here in the Auckland City Libraries as bindery manager for 14 years, and he now shows how to bind a traditional leather-bound book. So sit back and watch one of the last journeyman binders show how it is done.
Welcome to this next demonstration of various binding styles. This is the 5th in our series. Now what we have here are 2 various lectures, part 9 and part 10 of a series of lectures by the same author, and the owner of these books wants these 2 pieces to be put together into one volume. And as it's part of the family bibliography, we're going to go and a little bit over the top and put it into full leather. These appeared in paper covers, uncut, and for the purpose of this demonstration we're going to leave the books uncut, so that we retain the maximum size of margins. See what we've got here.
A lot of people wouldn't have known about uncut books, you know.
Yeah. We've extracted one of the sections from the book by cutting through the sewing. The folding is done to the head, which is governed by the head margin here, so that those are equal. 8 pages either side, with the heads in this middle gutter here. That's the head there. Right, now what we have to do to start off with is we've got to take the 2 books down by cutting through all the sewing and freeing up all the sections. And as we do this, we shall check through to see that there is no damage. I mean, they're close on to 100 years old. This is 1906, as I've said, so it's 99 years old, so it's not too bad. But we'll have to check for any damage. First sheet here. We find the centre of the section, and with our sharp knife, we cut through the threads. This last, the 4th page of it, has come adrift, so that'll need to be matched up to the title page to give us a complete folio there. Now here we have the centre of the section, and the 2nd page in gives us B2, so this is section B, and that's the 2nd page of the B section. Then we proceed to the next middle. We're on D, and we've got E. Once you've exhausted the first alphabet, A to Z, then we shall go on to the 2nd set of alphabets. And here we have the 2H indicates it's the 2nd set of alphabets. The next page in on that section is 2H2. In the good old days, the printer used to print, repeat the last word of one page on the start of the next page, and that was their way of checking that the things were in the right order. It's all down and flat. This one goes to it. The reason I put only a little bit on that side is because that's the title page, so we don't want too much showing on the title page, do we? Spot of the old French chalk. We've had a reasonable reception from the reviewers. Only one of the previous reviewers did mention about the difference of my shirts all the time, and they thought that the continuity person was slipping up on the job. Well, the change in shirts is deliberate. First of all, it indicates that we are doing these various sessions over a period of days, as binding does take quite a bit of time if you're doing one book on its own. and also it proves that I've got more than one shirt. Now the next thing to consider is the sewing, and as it's going to be a full bound book on recessed cords, we've got to do what we call the sewing in. And looking at the original sewing, the larger of the two was machine sewn, and machine sewing is done in double gangs of stitches, whereas the smaller of the two had been hand sewn previously on tapes, and you can see the original saw marks that the binder had made to sew it on the tapes. So when we knock it up to the head, as we're going to do, remembering that the book will not be cut in this case, we've got to consider whereabouts to place the new saw cuts where the recessed cords will lay. And always try and use the original holes from the previous sewing if possible. That reduces the amount of perforation in the actual bolt of the section and retains as much strength as you can. So you can see where I've marked it with a pencil in line with the original sewing holes where these three recessed cords will lay. We place a couple of boards either side, just a couple of waste boards. Keep the book nice and square, and then place it into the line press using the back of the saw, which is the rigid part of the saw. We just square the book up nice and level. Shape is everything in binding, and attention to the shape all the way through makes for a nice tidy effort. You visualize where the actual print area is, because at no time will the book be trimmed down into the print. So if the kettle stitches lie within the printed area, then of course your sewing is safe. We've got rather a large tail on this book, so we'll have the kettle stitch well in from the tail. Using the original sewing holes, we'll just make a slightly deeper cut this time, which will allow the sewing cord, the lay cord, to be recessed in. This was the first job I ever did as a binder, as an apprentice. My first job 60 odd years ago was sewing in, and I'm still doing it. Should have the knack of it by now. Those three grooves are deep enough to take our sewing thread. We present the book to the frame, and these are our lay cords suspended from the crossbar at the top. And then, being New Zealanders, we have a bit of number 8 wire. New Zealanders can't operate without number 8 wire at any time. And what we do here is we place the sewing key, that's what we have, a sewing key, underneath the base of the frame. And then holding it with our finger, we wind round the surplus string, and then we rotate the key through there, and then this cord here locks against the turned cord. This is then fed through this groove here, and when you've got the knack of it, there's a reasonable amount of tension there. On a more sophisticated sewing frame, you would have threaded pillars here with a nut which you could then move up the crossbar and take the tension that way. But this is a little bit primitive, but once you've got the knack of it, it's not too difficult. Then we'll repeat the process for the next one. Wind the surplus round the key, pass the cord through the 2 prongs, and then feed it through, and then turn it underneath. Right, madam, when you're ready, give us a wire.
Okay.
And now we come to the last two sections, just to sort of show you how we finish off. We present this section close to the lay cords, enter again with our needle. The left hand receives it inside the section and passes the needle back out. And then we run the cord round our finger so that we don't tear the paper inside. It takes the strain until we've eased all the thread through. We come out round the cord. The left hand then receives the needle again, takes it up the section, and taking the cord round our finger again to take off the strain. Back in, having gone round the lay cord, up to the third hole, and repeat that again. And then finally we go back in, and we come out at the top of the kettle stitch here, and we always drag the cord the way we've come so that we don't get any tearing of the holes in the back. Then gently take out any slack that might be still there, and when you're satisfied that it's as it should be, we then place the needle in a stroking action between the section below behind the kettle stitch and bring the needle through and round and then through the loop of cord so that it locks off, and that's repeated twice to make a complete knot. And then we come to the last section, which of course is the first one. And the reason I've done back to front is that when the sections are laying on our sewing frame, we can keep an eye on the signatures that's on the top of each section. The little signatures, they're visible to the sewer, and then of course you can keep an eye on that they are in their correct sequences. Of course the printer doesn't put a signature on the title page because there's enough information there to indicate that it's the first section. And out finally at the tail, and here again we just pull very gently, take out all the slack, and then we stroke our needle in again in the section below behind the kettle stitch there, and then bring the needle round and through the loop, giving us a locking stitch, and that's repeated twice. There was about 40 sections, and then there's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about another 11 sections there. Done about an hour and a half altogether. Like putting your hair in curlers on a Friday night. We should be able to pull these lay cords through. It's just ordinary hemp string, which has got 3 strands in it. And there we have the book sewn. Where's my hammer? The thickness measures 55 millimeters. We'll give it a press and we'll see how we can reduce that swell a little bit. All the cords in this case outside, you don't want them pressing in to the book and making an unsightly mark. Well, we'll leave the book in the press overnight. This will give it time to consolidate and come back to it in the morning. Look out for the new shirt. Boom, boom. Right, well, come to take the book out now. It's been in the press for nearly 48 hours. Dropped down from 55 millimeters to nearly 45 millimeters, so we've lost about 10 millimeters of swell. And the book now is a nice, solid, firm block. Now the next thing we have to do is to tip down the first and last sections with either paste or glue In this case it's going to be a drop of glue. This is just run down the joint, and then you smooth it out with your finger and take off the surplus. You don't want too much to squeeze out, and lock half the page off. And then we set this first section level with the second one. Now the reason all this is done, and also we tip down the first and last pages also, just to sort of hold it all together. And this gives us a foundation now for our end papers that we're going to put on. First of all, we need a folio of a suitable paper, a little bit darker than the book itself, but at least it's not brilliant white. Also, as we propose to do the book in a dark green leather, this cream will be complementary to it. I've lined it finely with a piece of linen over the back of the fold. There'll be a leather joint sitting on top of that, and so we shall need a fairly firm base for it. And as we're not going to trim the book, the end paper is slightly larger all round, so that we've got something to trim off once the end paper is fixed. If you try and cut the end papers to size before they go on, you inevitably finish up with a short edge somewhere. So rather than tempt Murphy, now some nipping boards. And as we've used glue, it's only a quick nip. Just mark a little F there for front. Now the next thing to do is glue the book up, and this is applying just a layer of thin glue to the back to stabilise the sewing. We just knock it up, keep the thing nice and square. Cut a pair of boards for this book, slightly bigger than what we need at the moment. There's the board itself with grey. I've lined it with the cream paper. The reason I've lined the board is very slight curvature where the paper is pulling, and it's tending to pull the board, so that when that goes paper side to the book, the board is naturally curling to the book, which will be the desired effect. With this end paper we're going to incorporate a leather joint along there, and so we shall have a frame of leather in which we can then inlay our doublure, just to cover the linen we've got there as the base. If we mark with a pencil there and there, we'll have a line to work to for our leather, making quite sure that the leg cords are out of the way. And that leather being pared thin, it will blend in with no ridges showing when we come to put the fancy marble on at a later stage. Well, we come to do the rounding now with our hammer, and this is just by very gently striking the top section of the book, at the same time pushing the fingers into the forage. Now the reason we leave the leg cords out is that as we spread the sections in by the backing, we want to allow the sections to move along that leg cord. If they were nipped inside, they would tend to burst, because there'd be no room for them to expand. This is a stroking action. Just check that the backing is not split the leather. If you tend to hit the leather with the hammer against the metal of the backing board, it could perforate it. Now the next stage is to trim our boards to the book, and of course to do this we've got to trim the end paper, haven't we? Now as the book is uncut, it could be out of square, it could be all over the place. So when we come to do the actual trimming of the board, we better just check that we've got a reasonably square board. We don't want a lopsided book. So we'll just see where our pencil marks come to. Yeah, there's a slight discrepancy there. So what I'll do, I'll make the mark to the widest part of the forage here, which is there. At this end it's a little bit out by about a 1/16 of an inch or 2 millimeters. That much is difference. Now of course we need to fix the square as well. We need a little bit more than the actual size. We're not making the book flush, so we need to set a square with our dividers, and then from our pencil mark we then, with our dividers, mark out where the edge of the board will be. And then we'll just trim this with a knife and straight edge. Just sandpaper the edge just to take out any burrs. We want a nice smooth edge, remembering that we're having leather on here, so that we don't want any ridges. They're not quite squares. Working from our back joint with our set square, we'll straighten up these pencil lines. We haven't got too much to play with, have we? Very economical. We've cut the boards now, and they are big enough to cope with all the variations in the actual size of the sections as the book is uncut, so that at least the book will stand square on the bookshelf. That's what they've got the telltale there for. We come now to the lacing on. Now the first thing to do is we relieve this inside corner, top and bottom, by just chamfering away the corner with our sharp knife. Now this is done because as the board will sit into the joint, when we come to turn our leather in, if the board is full and square, it will tend to poke through the turn-in, and we don't want any undue stress on the leather, and so we just relieve it. That leaves that little bit more room for the leather to sit. A small line with our knife opposite where the cords are going to come onto the lace, and this is repeated on the other side as well. This just indicates where the holes need to be punched for the lacings. Just a nail punch. What's happened to my board? Don't want to nail into the bench, do I? Make holes in the bench. We then cut with our sharp knife a shallow V either side of that score. Not all the way down to the bottom of the board. We want to leave a little bit of board to support the end paper, but sufficient for the cord to lay in without creating a bump. With our punch we then knock a hole in at the end of the V channel. And that puts our hole through to the inside, and then we need a return hole, and these are done offset. With the thumbnail just thinned out these lay cords so that they're not too lumpy. It's a hemp string, so it fluffs out quite nicely. And what we're going to do now is put some paste on these to bring them together, but we don't paste all the way down. We want to leave that first centimetre unpasted so that it's loose. Right. This is to thread them through. Need to do a bit of a twist. Waxing the old moustache again. This is so that the cord can be threaded through the holes without bunching up at all. And that one through there, and that one through there, and then pull them through, take out all the slack, and then return them through the second hole to the outside. and then pull those nice and tight. And we close the holes up with the hammer. And having done the initial close, we then take off the tail of the cord. We don't want that level with the board. And the same on the other side. We'll just give that a little tap. We have here a piece of slab steel, a knocking down iron as it's called, and we can close the holes on both sides, and this is done so that there's no lumps in the board. Well, we come now to the next stage of the book, and this is to do the lining for the back. But before we can do this, we've got to put a headband on. Now what I'm going to use is a machine headband, machine made. They come in various colours, and as we're going to do the book in green, with it being Irish, this green and white should be quite suitable. And for the period, it's only sort of early 1900s, it's quite permissible to use a handmade headband, a machine headband rather than a handmade one. And so what we have to do is just measure the length of the width of the back, and then very carefully trim it. And of course we need one for top and bottom, so we need two. These machine headbands come with either a cane stiffener, or in this case this is I think it's just cotton, two sort of strands of cotton, all very fine string in there. With the cane ones, one has to break it over the edge of the folder and form it into a curve, so that when it's placed on the back with its adhesive, it doesn't tend to spring away again and come unstuck. Very carefully up as far as the line of thread which secures the back of it. So now we present our headband to there. And with it going to be a leather book, another thing to bear in mind at this stage is we don't want the top of the headband to be in line with the board. That might be permissible in a cloth case book, but with leather we must remember that later on we're going to bring the leather over and form a cap here. We need a little bit of space there on top of the headband to put the cap over. First thing, that's why I get paid 7.6 an hour and you only get paid $5. Yes, okay, well we'll put it in the press now just to hold it, so we can do a little bit more adhesive, just to sort of freshen everything up. As with the previous lining up we did on a previous book, I'm going to put a piece of mull on the back here, which is 3 times the width of the book. Mull, it's just sort of a very dense, open wove bandage kind of material. This has got quite a bit of dressing in it, and they come in various grades. I'm just cutting a piece of paper here. Now, having done the mull, we're going to do what we call the first liner. We just measure off the width, what we need, joint to joint. And if there's any discrepancy in the back, we better measure both ends, because sometimes there might be a difference in the thickness. Yes, there is. Just you can see there's about 2 mm difference in the thickness of the tail as opposed to the head. In lining up a leather book is that we don't want to show a joint. The leather on the book wants to be able to go off the board and onto the spine without showing any ridge. It needs to be flush. We don't want any joint, because when we come to doing the paste down, this will be done open. Glue the paper, like we did on the headband. We'll give that a spot of adhesive, which will help to soften it, and then a layer of adhesive on top of the mull. If anything, cut it a little bit short so it'll allow for the stretch. If you make it the full size, apply my signature. Auckland 1309 NZ. Boom. Now we'll make the hollow. I find that making them on the flat, you get a tighter fit. Stretch the paper for you. We've got the paper tunneling the way of the grain, which is a good indication that we've got the right way. That's folded over, rub down nice and firmly. One layer of paper there, and the glued part onto there, making 2 layers there. So that now makes it 2 on and 2 off. And the hollow's in between, of course. Whoosh. That joint. And as I say, we've got to look at keeping this joint in line with the board. So pull it well over. Still 1 or 2 little bits and pieces we've got to attend to first though. Stretch out. And over there like that. And this is brought over. Pulled tight. Brought over to hide this last layer of mull. Doublure.
Yeah, that's it, yes.
Also in this rubbing down, you can work any surplus glue to the edges and then we take off. Now we have the book lined. And they'll be trimmed off. We're waiting for the lining up to dry and settle down. We can at least consider the next stage, which is of course preparing our piece of leather. This is the same material which we have for our leather joint, so it will all match when we come to do the turning. Just lay our book roughly in position and just see how much turning we've got to play with. Chalk, if I can find it. We can just mark where the boards are going to lay on the corners here. And where the hollow will sit. Give us an indication that's the front there. Paring is the shaving down of the underside of the leather, and what we're going to do is just thin this area here, double the depth, so that when the turning is turning on itself, it won't be too much of a ridge. So that's going to be done there, and we're going to have a doublure, which is an inlaid board. It won't be necessary to do any paring at all on this, because whatever thickness the leather might be, we can build up the board on the inlay to match. I've used for years just an ordinary Victorian dinner knife, the non-stainless variety. Stainless steel you can't sharpen very well, but on a fine emery, which is mounted on a piece of board, you can sharpen these up quite nicely and get quite a good edge on them. And with a paring knife, I'm right-handed, so the bevel has to be on this side of it. Keep the bottom edge flat. And then on the back there's a piece of hide, which you use as a strop, very much like the old cutthroat razors. Just strop it up, get rid of all the burrs. There's no need to go to an expense of buying these very expensive paring knives. That was my earliest one, and of course that's worn right down, and now that's used for fine work on indexing or fine cutting. The blade is very rigid now, there's not much flexibility in the short blade. Whereas the long blade, of course, has still got some flexibility in it. It's a bit too floppy. But as you go on and you gradually wear them down with the sharpening, they take shape. So it always pays to scrounge around all these second-hand shops and see if there's any old Victorian dinner knives available. Getting very scarce now, well over 100 years since they were in use. This knife was my grandmother's, and she died 30 years ago. She was born in 1874 and got married in 1898. And that was one of her dinner knives she used in a regular thing, just an ordinary dinner knife. And Grandad's job was every week to sharpen these, because not being stainless, they used to go rusty unless you kept them highly cleaned. So they used to have a contraption where they used to put the knives into a slot and turn this handle, and the emery boards used to buff them. I'm going to cut this now and cut it level, flush with the headband. Now what we have to do now is to gently open the book, and this will then open up our hollow, and with a sharp knife we then make a cut up the hollow sufficient to allow the leather to turn in. So looking at about 3 centimeters. In modern lineage, watch you don't cut yourself. We have to just take off the corner of the headband at this stage here, just to relieve the corner, so that we've got no too much stuff in the joint there. Just lightly. Just run some paste in. We've already checked the leather itself to see if there's any flaws or imperfections in the grain, and it looks fairly even, so we're just checking that the best part goes onto the front. We've got the front of the bookmark there. So we'll now place this in position to our chalk marks, which we made previously. And we'll pull the leather over. And then make quite sure that the leather comes over. No razor bands on this one. And then we can just turn that back and glue the board. Take hold of the material. This is a little bit more rapid. And turn it over, making sure that your boards don't move, so that you keep it square as it should be, and you glue this board. Now PVA, as I say, is fairly quick drying, so we shan't need to nip it at all. If you start nipping leather, you sometimes put a too high a glaze on the covering and kill the grain. Quite sure it sits down on the edge of the board, so we don't want to. Right, at this stage we've now got to consider the corners. So we take our paring knife and by placing the knife against the corner of the board at an angle of 45 degrees, we can, I hope, run the knife through and take the corner off. And of course this has to be repeated on all the corners at this stage. And it's taken off at an angle. Like a bit of old rag this leather is. It's a couple of spare folders. It should be in here and not. We just gently open the book to give us our hollow there, you see. And then put the spare folder in there and bring it through and up the side of the board where we made that cut previously in the hollow. This is going to allow us to do the turning. And we put the other folder in there and bring this through to there. This opens up the back. By doing it in stages like this, the keen amateur has got plenty of time to deal with any little things that might crop up. We then, with a clean thumb, take hold of the turn in here at the head and just roll it in to our gap in the hollow there, and then over onto the board either side. And the glue is not quite tacky enough yet to bite, but persevere and it'll go over. That can come out there now, and having got it initially over, we can then take out our folder and make sure it's well in there. Bring it over onto the board. No gaps needed. force it out for the moment. And at this stage, just wet the end of the thumb, give you a bit of lubrication, and then with the thumbnail you just ease out this turning back again, and so that you have an even amount of leather showing parallel to the headband, and this will then be brought over when we come to set the head. We sit the board level on the joint, and this allows us then to really position this leather against this chamfered corner here. There. While the leather is still wet, we're going to place our straight edge at an angle of 45 degrees to the corner, and with the knife at an angle, not perpendicular, at an angle to give us a chamfer, we'll do a cut sufficient to go through both layers of leather. Then we take off the top one there, we lift the leather and then remove the bottom one, this reduces the amount of bulk of 2 layers of leather at this critical stage, because we want it to be nice and flush. Guide the thing up and set the heads. So we'll put our forces back in here just to sort of make quite sure that this area between the turnings is supported. And then we dive into our drawer and find a piece of cotton with a running noose. And this is placed over the joint, top and bottom, and then when you're happy that it's in the correct position, you then pull it tight. Then we leave the undone end first over the edge of the glass so it doesn't get damaged. Bring this folder right against the corner of the joint, and we'll do that the same there. Making sure that the book is well pushed into the back and supporting it. Hold it firmly, and with the folder we tap over this turning to form the cap. Having got it turned over, we then take the folder at an angle of 45 degrees and bring it round, tapping it in, and then as you gradually work it, you bring the folder into the perpendicular, so you finish up with a nice straight flat back on the end. Yes, we'll just put it away now to bed down for the next 24 hours. So get a couple of clean smooth boards and a light weight. We don't want too heavy a weight to crush the grain of the leather. Come now to the stage of putting down this leather joint. So the thing to do now is to work out where this leather will sit, and then with our sharp knife we're going to cut in at 45 degrees and remove this very carefully. Very carefully glue the leather and the joint. Holding the board here with the left hand, you work over the leather joint onto the board with a bit of spit. Now these days most of the finishing is done with a gold foil as opposed to gold leaf. What it is a plastic carrier onto which is sprayed the gold, and then onto that is sprayed the fixing agent, which when the heat is applied to the tool transfers the gold from the carrier to the material. From olden times the books were sewn on 5 cords, which give the raised bands. And so the finisher had to work on a sort of a 6-panel. And so what we've done here on the companion volume, we've already done this. And of course at the tail, there's what's known as the double tail. It's sort of a part of a panel. And this is so that when the book is on the shelf, it gives the appearance, it's an optical thing, that the thing is sort of evenly spaced. If you didn't have that double tail, it would look as if it's sort of dropping down out at the bottom of things. This is a roll. It's a brass wheel of about 3-inch diameter, and on its edge is engraved a pattern. So the plain line ones are fillets. And well, this is just a normal stove, electric, and we have it on a low setting. And then we have a saucer with a piece of wet cloth in it as our cooler. We have been using, of course, second-hand gold, that is gold that's already been used on other previous jobs. But when you're doing straight line work, it's possible to use all the offcuts up where there's enough gold left. But for the purpose of today's demonstration, my producer wants me to go to the great expense of using some fresh gold so that it will film better, rather than showing all these secondary impressions. Now, for the amateur, possibly is a little bit daunted by the fact of trying to run a fillet or a roll over the back and keeping it straight. So what you can do, you get a piece of stiff card or manila and just run this over the folder so that it put a curl into it. And this can be placed up to your mark where you want it to be.
Which is a fresh piece.
Which is a fresh piece, of course. As I say, no expense spared here. And then that can be placed back again. We can run our fillet, in this case, along the edge of our manila card. And there we are. Our companion volume, which we've done in half bound, will now stand on the shelf as a matched pair. Let's consider doing our finishing for the doublure. Just measure up the minimum space. Straight lines are straightforward. With a piece of pressure sensitive tape, we apply this onto our straight edge and then line up the straight edge with our marks which we've made, and we'll do the narrowest piece of leather first. In this case, place the straight edge up to the marks and then fix it in position by pressing the tape down to our board. This forms a hinge. Then, going to the great expense of using some new gold, we can cut a piece off the roll. We can place our gold in position and then return our straight edge. Now, if we were going to do a mitered thing, we'd have to mask off at 45 degrees at the corners, but in this case we're going to do it the Oxford style, where it's run straight through. We apply our fillet, and there we have our first line. We'll put a weight there, hold it down. This is an Irish book, so we're going to use a shamrock as a sort of corner tool here, just to sort of hide the join. We come to do the side. What I propose to do here is to follow through with our lines onto the main board here, creating our frame, using the shamrock motif in the corners again, give it a little bit more decoration. Just check. Good job, light travels in straight lines. From the head here, the gold will pick up on the tape rather than the leather. Actually, we've got a stop line there then. We've cut ourselves a template. We're going to have this sort of lozenge effect in the middle. Now here again, with this optical thing, if we line up the side points of the lozenge with this band here, that being above centre, then this also will give us that optical arrangement where the bottom is a little wider than the top, as we can see from our dividers. From there, that's that, whereas there, it's just that fraction above. But it's an optical thing, and here again that wants to be fairly central there. Measure this from the gold work. That's about spot on. We can make a pencil mark where our points are going to be. Right. Now we've got our point there, so we'll mask that off. And our point there, so we'll mask that off. Place our straight edge, point to point. We can see it, it's just there. And then using our second-hand gold.
Old habits die hard.
They do, they do. Now we're going to do the finishing for the spine. We've already done the panels with the fillet lines, and these have been stopped off with our little shamrock to give sort of a hinging effect. Anyway, I've set up the title, The Metrical Dingenchas, possibly something in Gaelic, and I've made a blind impression where the type goes onto this paper, the length of the type where the impression is, and this is done so that when we come to present our type to the book, we've got a rough idea of where to start from the joint and where it will finish up so we can get it central. And the next thing to do is to get our dividers and measure the height of the type. In this case, this is what I call 16 point. And so I've set my dividers at that. And then marked very carefully on the spine here with my dividers where the 3 lines of type will be. It's all very scientific, this.
Not hot enough.
Well, I hope so. And then we lay our... I'm leaving space for the first word, which is the. And I'll just refresh my memory where to start. That gives us that. And then we just have a look where the third word comes, which is about there, which is quite close to the joint. Can't hang around too long, otherwise I get my thumb burnt. Just cooling the type down to boiling point. It's been on the stove a little bit too long, so we just cool it off. We're going to do the centre tools next. We're going to use the harp here, the third panel here. This panel will be for the author, and parts 2 and 3 will sit there, and then we'll use the final panel for the harp again. We can just mark with our divider point where we want it to be. Just test the heat again. Yes, it's still warm enough. And two, three. Clean up the impression. Sometimes with the leather, some of the surface dressing on the leather doesn't always respond to the gold as it should do. We're going to finish off now with the doublure at the end papers. The next thing is to find a piece of board which is virtually equal to the thickness of the leather. We didn't do any paring to thin the leather down. We've got the full maximum thickness of the skin. So we've got a piece of board now which is equal to that, so that when this is laid into this panel here, then we won't have any depression for our end paper, which is going to be turned in round this board to form the doublure. Oh, steak and kidney pud. Oh yes, rumptious. Melts in your mouth. I've never. The pastry is lovely and light, you know. God, out of this world it was. I've never expected to sort of taste such a delightful dish. Says he, dropping out all his tools in excitement. Another nuts whisker. See, we have to allow for the extra paper that's going to be turned in round all 4 edges. Sometimes, due to the human involvement here, lines don't always run quite parallel to each other. But if the board is cut with the lines in mind, then it doesn't stand out as too much of a faux pas. Put a cross there and there to see which way the board is going to sit here, because sometimes if you turn it around the other way it could be out of kilter. We're going to cover the board now with our fancy marble paper as tightly as possible. We don't want any extra ridges on the side. It wants to be nice and firm. And now we have our board covered. We've got to have the comb of the design, in this case running the same way as the comb on the doublure here, so it's got to be going that way to match. The thing to consider is when we're doing this fly leaf, we need to glue or paste out the fly itself so that this will stretch, and then when it comes to dry, the shrinkage will allow the paper to curl to the book. You never want to open a book and have the fly leaf leap up to meet you. And so by gluing or pasting this out first, allowing it to stretch, this will allow the fly leaf to curl slightly to the book when it dries. But having said that, we need to make quite sure that this leading edge of the here needs to be well stuck on top of the leather joint. So what we do is to glue out as close to the leather as possible, not onto it, just up to it. Do this first, and this allows the fly leaf to stretch. Paper always stretches when it gets damp. And as we've got the grain running head to tell, you can see how it's curling already. Then while that's sort of just bedding down and stretching, we can just dress this leading edge of the fly marble paper so that we can stick this down on top of our leather joint. So we'll turn our book round, so we'll present this to there, and then rub it down, get rid of all the pockets of air that might be in the way. You don't cut this to size until after the thing's dried out completely and all the shrinkage has taken place. Our fancy is a little larger than the actual fly leaf, and it will, when it's trimmed off, as we've done on the back already, it'll be to the size of the book. And then with our sharp knife we make little mark points with at the corners of where our board is going to sit. We proceed to cut out the leather that's not needed. We just have a check to see that it fits, and it does. When you're happy that the board's going to fit in the hole, we then just turn it over, spotted glue. We then present this to our aperture and make quite sure it's fitting on all four sides, and then very carefully just press it in, and then we have our completed doublure. All that remains now is, when this is dry, is to just trim this around very carefully to the size of the book, and the job is done.
Is that it?
That's it.
That's it?
That's it.